This is the Medical Marijuana Radio Show with Larry Love. All love.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Medical Marijuana Radio. This week, we're going to have Brett Dalke from CP Labs in Ohio. We're going to talk about analytics and cannabis. But first, let me remind you that every Friday and Saturday nights on Clubhouse, I have my Late Night with Larawana show. We hang, we smoke, we talk. And check us out on Clubhouse. And you can also check out the replays without the app on my Facebook page. And now, without any further ado, here is Brett Dalke.
This is the Medical Marijuana Radio Show with Larry Love. All love.
And today we're talking to Brett Dalke, and from 2021 to present, he is the co-founder and president and lab director of CP Labs in Columbus, Ohio. Welcome to Medical Marijuana Radio.
Oh, thanks so much, Larry. It's a pleasure to be here.
So it's a big move to go from Colorado into Ohio. Tell me what that was about first, because you have all this great experience in Colorado, I'm guessing at the beginning and the middle of the adult use. So when did you get into analyzing cannabis?
So this is actually a new venture into analyzing cannabis. I come from a background of environmental testing. So I was co-president, and lab director of ACZ Laboratories in Steamboat Springs, Colorado for the last 5 years, and worked my way up through that organization over the course of a 14-year career at ACZ. And we do similar testing to the cannabis testing that we're going to be doing here at CP Labs. Using similar instrumentation, but with soil and water samples from all over the world. So this is not just a shift into Ohio, but it's also a shift into the cannabis industry for me.
Okay, so what machinery will you be using for cannabis?
So we have a wide array of instrumentation here. We're going to be obviously using some microscopes to examine the cannabis when it comes in for filth and foreign material. We have microbial instruments to study microbial growth, mycotoxins. We've got ICP-MS, which is used to detect heavy metals, especially heavy metals that are going to be dangerous to people when they consume cannabis. We've got a GCMS, we've got an HPLC, and we've got a triple quad LCMS. It's a lot of acronyms and letters and whatnot there. So each of those instruments basically uses different technology to tease out and analyze different parts of the cannabis.
Okay, so tell me about what standardization that you're using and protocols, because cannabis, the industry for testing cannabis really on a mass level has only been in the last 10 years or so. So, and what I have found as a consumer on the other end and as an advocate in the medical and adult use industry, variations from labs to labs. So where are the standards coming from, and do we have them now, or are we still sort of flying by the seat of our pants?
Standards are going to be coming from manufacturers. We're using Agilent technology, and that comes with a fully supported suite of standards and reagents that we can use to run our instruments and to make sure that they're calibrated correctly, that they're all running properly and whatnot. So those come from instrument manufacturers.
So, and then you have your own SOPs as well?
Yeah, we're writing those SOPs right now. We've got to have all of those SOPs done before we open for business. Good standard operating procedures is what SOP stands for, standard operating procedures. Those are essential to running a good laboratory so that you know exactly what the procedure is supposed to be. People are trained on that SOP. They get approved on that SOP, and then everybody knows what they're doing.
Okay, cool. So where are you getting your background in testing cannabis? Do you have to go through a course or anything, to see what needs to be done to a sample?
No, there's no course requirements in the state of Ohio. State of Ohio requires that the lab is overseen by someone who has at least a PhD or master's degree and either 4 years or 2 years of experience in the laboratory setting. But right now, Ohio does not have any minimum requirements of cannabis experience, a cannabis class, a degree. anything like that. So we brought Hamant Bid on board. He's our scientific director. He's been involved in the cannabis industry for a number of years here in the Columbus area. So we brought him on for our cannabis experience. We're going to be relying pretty heavily on him, as my expertise is largely in the operation and running of labs, not in the testing of the cannabis specifically.
Well, he's the right guy to have. I interviewed him before, and I just love talking to him. And we're going to have him on very soon as well to talk about a few things with cannabis. So I guess my question is, have you gone and hung out in some cannabis analytic labs in other states to get any knowledge or to learn what's going on? Or
Yeah, a little bit. It's pretty hard to break into. It can be kind of a secretive industry. Obviously folks aren't going to want to let you into their lab and show you all their SOPs and their secrets if they know you're going to be a competitor, especially in that same state. So that's actually one of the big challenges in setting up a cannabis laboratory these days is the lack of information, especially the lack of standardized information. I'm relying a lot on my background of running, analytical instruments using different matrices, obviously not using cannabis, using soil, using waters. We're going to be running some of the same instrumentation we ran at my old lab. So it's a combination of learning what we're going to have to do and bringing on the right people. We're bringing on folks who've got experience not only in the industry, but specific experience on these instruments. Our lead analyst is coming from a lab in Florida, which is an internal lab. He has 4 years of experience in analytical chemistry of cannabis specifically. So we'll be leaning pretty heavily on a couple of key players here, especially as we get started and up and running.
So do you find that it's hard to find qualified people in order to work in a lab like this, or most people trainable to do what you need them to do?
I think that everybody's having hiring issues right now. I think finding someone who has a number of years of experience specifically running this instrumentation with cannabis has been difficult for us to find. We've only got a couple of folks with those qualifications on staff. A lot of folks who are, good with chemistry, who like working on instruments, who like working in the lab, are trainable on the cannabis end of things. So if you enjoy lab work and have experience in that sort of a science background, our intention is to bring the cannabis knowledge up to speed. If you can handle the instrumentation in a lot of ways, it's like running anything else. If you know how to run an ICP-MS for water, or for soil samples, then you can run it for cannabis samples as well. Obviously, cannabis has a lot of its own special challenges, matrix related, a really complicated plant to study because there's a lot of different compounds, a lot of different molecules, a lot of different contaminations. You're dealing with, a pretty complicated matrix sample, but at the bottom line, at the end of the day, it's like running any other sample on an analytical instrument.
Are you able to detect the hops latent viroid in testing, or yes?
Yeah, that'll be something that we'll be testing for sure.
Have you seen it already?
I have not. We do not have actual samples in house yet.
Okay.
So before we have any of our cannabis standard samples, et cetera, we've got to get full approval from the state, and we're still in the provisional process there. So.
All right. So what does that mean? It says you have one of 5 or 6 provisional licenses in Ohio. Now, Ohio, I believe, is just medical right now. Am I correct?
That's correct.
So what does it take to go from provisional to active?
So provisional license, we applied for our provisional license in November of 2020. We got smacked by COVID along with everybody else that spring, and state of Ohio took a little while to approve the labs for the provisional program. We got our provisional license on August 3rd of 2021, at which point, all of the planning and hoping had, became reality. And you basically have 6 months to get your lab up and running, build it, get it stocked with instrumentation, staffed, and ready to open the doors.
Is that pretty good period of time? Is that enough time for you guys to get?
It's been a tight timeline. We currently have our February 3rd deadline has been extended through the end of March right now. So our goal is to be fully operational by April 1st.
Okay, that's April 1st.
It's gonna be about 8 months from provisional to actual license right now.
And so, how many years old is the medical program in Ohio?
So don't quote me on this, but I believe that they legalized in 17
Hmm.
and didn't actually get laboratories up and running and fully approved until 2019. So there was an initial round of laboratory approval. There were a number of labs approved in that round. And essentially, only two full-time laboratories ended up coming out of that process and
Hmm.
serving the state of Ohio to this point.
So there's two active right now. How many dispensaries are there?
Last count, I believe there were 83 dispensaries in the state.
That doesn't sound like a lot. I mean, you have some big cities
Yeah.
there. So, I mean, are there outlying areas that aren't being served right now?
There are, it depends, as obviously it's municipalities can enact regulations. Some are cannabis friendly for, dispensaries and grow operations, and some are not. So yeah, I as far as I can tell, and it'll be interesting to see once we actually start processing samples and seeing what kind of volume it is. It seems like with the whole state of Ohio being serviced by two laboratories, that the 4 or 5 laboratories going through the provisional process right now are really going to be needed to help with the bottleneck of science.
Okay. Is there a bottleneck right now going on because of
Yeah,
the only two labs? Okay.
that's what we're hearing for sure. So
Are
that's one of
are
the reasons that we moved into this state, is to help serve that.
is so what is it called? I mean, look, one of the most important things about being in the medical cannabis industry and in the adult use is good testing. We want to know that
Correct.
these products are healthy and so forth. So heavy metals and all that stuff is really important to know if it's in there. So and at the same time, that's a very expensive part of a grower, vertically integrated company. To get involved with. So what does it cost? Do you have your numbers yet on what you're going to need to be charging, or do you know what others are being charged now per test? Because that can add up to a lot.
It depends. Obviously, you're going to have a list price, and our list price is going to be, somewhere around the $500 or $600 for a full suite test. That's basically everything that the state requires for compliance. There will be a la carte options so that you can pick and choose various tests if you want to do R&D work, that sort of thing. We'll have the ability to test for more compounds and more metals than are required for compliance. So the cost can really vary. If someone wants a full panel of absolutely everything that we could possibly do, it could get kind of expensive for a single sample. But I would think for most full panels, we're going to be in that $500 to $600 range.
All right, and if you have 15 different strains, are you taking and times 500? Is it per plant or is it per batch? How does that work?
State of Ohio, the way that the regulations currently read, and I'm going to have to look up the specifics here just to refresh my
No.
memory, but I believe it's for it's a certain sample size per unit. So for produced gummies, for instance, I think it's you have to do a sample every 1,000 or 10,000 units. You've got to have one of those as part of your sample. I believe for flour, it's an ounce per. Don't quote me. I don't have those numbers right in
No, I
front of me, but
understand.
it's a certain, each batch is batched, and you've got to pass a quality control sample through, a third party lab like ourselves.
So my question is this: I've seen such variations in test results. We only had during medical here in New Mexico, where I'm from, we only had like 34 licenses, 35 licenses over the last bunch of years. Of course, now we're going adult use in 40 days or so, April 1st, and there's only two labs here, by the way, and
Mhm.
there's such a variation. Um, from lab to lab, and is that because of technique, SOPs, different kinds of equipment? What would make labs vary, the variant between labs? What?
All of those things can affect, obviously, lab results. That's one of the reasons I'm passionate about bringing my expertise and experience into this industry, is trying to eliminate some of that variation between labs.
Hmm.
If you really are running your instrumentation properly, it shouldn't really matter what the manufacturer is. It shouldn't matter too much the techniques, if everybody is following good standard SOPs, the results should be the same. One of the issues I think that we have right now is there's no federal guidelines. And so
Right.
you've got a lot of variation between laboratories and a lot of leeway to write your own SOPs, develop your own methods, as long as you're hitting certain criteria, and those criteria obviously vary widely state to state. As long as you're hitting the state minimum criteria, you're going to be able to pass samples through for compliance. I think that standardized methods, standardized SOPs, is really important thing to try to work towards in this industry, so that we're not getting that variation between labs, so that you're getting, good results, no matter if you send it to our lab or if you send it to somebody else.
Right. So let's talk about bud for a second, if you don't mind. The
Sure.
flower. Well, flower is a huge part of the sales and what people want and so forth. So as a grower, and I've been involved with the plant for over 50 years, I know that if you test a bud from the top of the plant and the middle and the bottom, you're going to come up with different levels of cannabinoids and so forth. So what kind of samples are you asking your clients to provide to you?
So it's interesting, and that also varies state to state. You could obviously, if you had a client sampling their own product, they would potentially be sampling parts of the flower that have higher THC percentages, because you could then sell that flower for a higher premium. So state of Ohio requires that we employ a sample collector. So we actually have a van that goes out to all the sites, collects the samples, and so that the folks that are growing or the folks that are producing the product can't influence the sampling process. So that sampler is then trained by us to take a representative blind sample, and return it to the laboratory here, where we can then analyze it. So
Okay, so they're trying to do that here in New Mexico.
yeah.
Okay. And honestly, I'm against that unless you can sort of convince me that that's a good idea, because it's causing an extreme amount of extra cost by your client and by yourself, because you have to now hire somebody for a position at X amount of dollars a year and an hour to go out there and drive to a place and do those samples. I mean, that's a whole nother industry. How valuable is that to the analytical industry?
That's a good question. I think at this point in the infancy of this industry, that it is one key way that you could get less subjective, more objective sampling, because I don't think that there's enough oversight right now to trust that growers and producers are going to be sampling, have a good blind sampling method. So you want to be scientific, and you want to be blind in the way that you approach the samples, so that you can get a good representative
But
result.
can you imagine the grower, the farmer, the guy that's out in the field who has to grow this plant, and
Yeah.
he's selling it wholesale to either a distributor or to a the dispensary that's going to then make products out of it and so forth. That seems to be, for me, my thoughts are that it's a great burden to the person at the bottom who's growing everything, and actually has about the lowest level of profit in regards to what they're doing in the industry. And one of the most important is, garbage in, garbage out. You know that from
Sure.
analytics and so forth. So do you think in the future there's a better way of doing this that doesn't hurt the farmer? The farmer's going to get killed, in a lot of these situations.
I think you could mitigate some of that perhaps with sample size. If you get large homogenated batches together, it's not, prohibitively expensive for us. For example, we have one van and one sampler and collector right now, and we're planning to cover the whole state of Ohio with that. So, they'll be able to, that's one of the great things about being in Columbus, go north and reach the whole northern part of the state one day. The next day they go south, can hit the southern part of the state. The third day, maybe they do the Columbus area. So I think that we can minimize expenses by, trying to do large homogeneous batches, so that we're not, taking too much product. But, I don't see a better way to do it right now. I think that that having us, essentially we're acting as almost a third party version of the government oversight.
Mhm.
So, having somebody, who's impartial, who doesn't have any skin in the game as far as what the results are going to be, I don't know if you've got a better way to do impartial sampling.
So, what are the rules in Ohio? Okay, are they here in New Mexico? There's some things they're not even looking for yet. Okay, I mean, look, heavy metals are very important. Pesticides
Mhm.
are very important. So, has the state gotten gotten their standards from somewhere that it makes sense for what you're going to be looking for when you're testing?
Yes, the state has good guidelines, but there's definitely a lot of variation between states. And whenever you're running a lab, obviously you're striving for the highest level of accuracy as possible. For us, we want to be super accurate and we want to have fast turnaround times. It's what our clients are looking for. So, I think that as the industry matures, you're going to start to see more similarities between states, between countries, as far as what they're requiring for testing for pesticides, what they're requiring for heavy metals. We're going to be testing for more things that are minimally required in Ohio,
Hmm.
just because I think that our customers want that, and we want the ability to grow with the industry when the state comes along and says, "Hey, you know what? We need to set levels for X or Y or
Hmm.
Z." Um,
So, what are those things that you are going to test extra for that the state's not asking that the end user might want to enlighten me on that?
for instance, like a longer list of terpenes
Ah,
or cannabinoids. So
okay.
things like that, where you may not have any requirements as far as the state is concerned, but the consumer is really interested in, the entourage effect and what terpenes are, in their product and, how they interact with each other.
So, when you're looking at a delta 8 molecule, have you looked at a delta 8 molecule?
Me personally,
Yeah.
we don't have any in house yet.
Okay.
So
So
so the
I
answer
was
is
just
no.
wondering, does it look exactly like THC and just at a lower level, or does delta 8 have its own, little quirky molecule?
It's got its own little quirky molecule so that you
Uh-huh.
can tease it apart.
So you can, so if you did find some, if you were testing for hemp or whatever, and you found, delta 8 in there, you'd be able to tell how much delta 8 was in there.
You would
Uh-huh.
definitely.
So, where do you think this should go in the future? I mean, obviously you're looking to the future, and everyone's learning right now. I mean, there's been analytical labs, around for a long time, but
Sure.
the industry is changing, will you be doing hemp also at the
We're not
same
doing
lab?
hemp initially, and we're open to it in the future, but we're focusing on just the medical cannabis.
Hmm. Let's see if I had anything else that you'd like to bring up and tell us about CP.
Well, I'm not definitely not on the show for self promotion here, but
Well,
it
no,
was a
but
big
that's part of it. You're here
it
to
was
help medical patients, and when it goes adult use, we love labs because we want to know that it's clean. So
100%.
we want to know what you're thinking about for the next 5 years, let's say, in analyzing cannabis.
Well, so I'd love to become a leader not only in Ohio but across the country, as far as establishing good scientific methods, good policies, good SOPs, standardizing this laboratory industry from state to state. Because there's no reason that you should, go to Michigan or go to Ohio and receive, vastly different standards just because you're in a different state. You've gone across state lines. I
Yeah.
think that's the kind of thing that we need to, as a country, get together and say, hey, if this does become federally legal, or at least federally medical, then we need to have good standards that can be reproduced no matter what state you're in.
When do you foresee adult use in Ohio?
That's a good question. Hamat has a better finger on the pulse than I do. He's been in this community for a long time. My family, we just moved here in December, so we've only been around for a couple of months. Word on the street here is they're thinking it'll go in the next couple of years.
Okay, well, I think this year in most states was a short congressional and Senate session, and during the long sessions is when generally when these kind of issues come up to be voted on and so forth. So I want to wish you, best of luck in this new endeavor of yours. It's very important what you're doing, especially for people in the medical industry, because they have compromised immune systems, and they want to know that everything is clean. In your opinion, do you think that bud can test? I mean, I know you haven't got too much hands-on yet with cannabis, but do you think that bud can test over 33%? I've seen people claiming 40% THC in bud, and I don't believe it, honestly. I don't believe in anything over 25, honestly, with 53 years worth of experience behind me.
That will be interesting to see the results.
Yeah.
Oh,
I got another one for you.
Sure.
I've always wanted to ask this. Let's say you get a batch of crude, okay, and you test that. You do your full panel and you do your full testing on that. Then your client takes that crude and they're going to make edibles with it.
Correct.
That's all going to have to come back again for testing of the edibles. Is that correct?
It is. Yeah, that is correct. 100%.
Because we want to know. Yeah.
Because the process can introduce especially contaminants at that point. Now, and also potency. So, you want to know what your ingredients are going in, so that the folks that are, doing the chemistry, that are making the medical marijuana products, know exactly what percentage of THC, CBD, the other cannabinoids are in there, so that they can infuse their products properly. And then obviously you want to test those products to make sure that they did it well. One of the big things, is residual solvents. A lot of these extraction methods use solvents that you don't want to have anywhere near your body. So you want to make sure that there's nothing residual left over from the extraction process. You want to make sure that there's no heavy metals in anything that you're consuming as a consumer, which could be introduced anywhere, from, let's say, a vape pen that has a compromised heating element that is maybe a cheap Chinese knockoff that has heavy metals that maybe a more expensive heating element doesn't. So those are the kinds of things that you want to make sure that you're testing for after medically infused products have been produced.
Brett, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time today. Best of luck. And let's check back with you next year after things get up and rolling. And I appreciate the fact that you are in this space, because it is important to us back here.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks so much, Larry. It was a pleasure being on your show.
My pleasure. We'll be right back after this.
This is the Medical Marijuana Radio Show with Larry Love. Thank you, Brett.
Also want to thank my two radio mentors, both with the initials HS. Thank you for your inspiration. Don't forget, every Friday and Saturday nights, midnight on the East Coast, 9 p.m. West Coast, late night with Larawana on Clubhouse. You can also listen live without the app as well. Peace and love, everybody. Peace and love. We'll see you next week with another great guest. Oh, yeah.